Have you ever wondered why every empire that rose to greatness eventually went broke? Not through war, not through invasion, but through the slow poison of their own currency. Every empire in history had its glory days and its breaking point. Rome didn't collapse in a single battle. It died coin by coin, as emperors quietly shaved silver off their denarii to fund endless wars. The Byzantines, they printed their way into chaos. And China, the very birthplace of paper money, watched its dynasties crumble when the paper lost its worth faster than ink could dry. History has a cruel sense of humor. It never repeats exactly, but it always rhymes. And the rhyme this time might sound a lot like the hum of the Federal Reserve's printing machines. Now fast forward to today, the United States of America, modern Rome in a suit and tie, a superpower whose currency rules the planet. The US dollar isn't just money anymore. It's the bloodstream of global trade, the passport of international trust. Nations hold it like treasure. Corporations worship it. People save it as if it's sacred scripture. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Beneath that glossy green paper and the bold words, "In God we trust," lies something every fallen empire once ignored: cracks. Quiet, expanding cracks that no one wants to talk about. And before we dive deeper, if you're into stories where history exposes the future, hit that like button and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just about America's dollar. It's about how every empire slowly builds its own downfall. The dollar's power wasn't born by luck. It was engineered. Every step of its rise was calculated through wars, oil deals, and political chess moves that rewired the world. Think about it. 1944, Bretton Woods. The US walks out holding the keys to the global vault. 1971, Nixon cuts the dollar from gold, rewriting the rules overnight. 1973, America strikes a quiet deal with Saudi Arabia. Sell your oil only in US dollars. And boom, the petrodollar is born. From that moment, every country that needed oil needed dollars. And that meant the world needed America. But here's where the twist begins. Every dominance has a debt, and that debt is catching up. Trillions printed. Inflation disguised. Wars funded on credit. The very tool that made America powerful is now the same one testing its foundation. So tonight, let's peel back the curtain on what they call the almighty dollar. Because when a currency becomes too trusted, too global, too inflated with faith, history doesn't applaud it. History tests it. I want you to think about this. What happens when the world's trust in that green paper fades? Would the fall of the dollar mean the fall of the empire behind it? Stick around, because this is where we uncover the 7 hidden truths about the US dollar. Truths that most won't say out loud, but you're about to see them all. If knowledge is power, this episode might just be the most powerful thing you'll hear this week. To understand the dollar, you have to stop thinking of it as money. It's not a piece of paper. It's not even a number on your screen. The US dollar, from the very start, was built as a weapon of control. Let's rewind the clock. It's 1944. World War II is nearing its end. Europe is in ruins, Asia is burning, and America, untouched, powerful, and rich, calls the world's leaders to a quiet resort in New Hampshire. Bretton Woods. There, inside smoke-filled conference rooms, 44 nations sat around a table. And the deal they signed that day didn't just rebuild the world. It reprogrammed it. Under the new system, every major currency would be tied to the US dollar, and the dollar itself would be tied to gold. Simple, right? Except for one thing. The gold was sitting in America's vaults. From that day onward, every nation that wanted to rebuild, trade, or borrow had to go through the dollar, and just like that, but without firing a shot, the US became the banker of the planet. Now think about how genius that is. While other nations rebuilt with bricks and sweat, America rebuilt with signatures and interest rates. The world wasn't just using the dollar, where it was depending on it. That's when the dollar stopped being money. It became the bloodstream of power, a silent empire built not with soldiers, but with debt. And here's the twist most people never notice. When your money becomes everyone's lifeline, you can print it without fear. Because who's going to complain? The very world that needs it. You see, when America printed dollars, other nations printed hope. But hope isn't infinite, and neither is trust. Now, take a second and drop a comment below. Do you think the dollar earned its power or took it? I'd love to hear your take, because this story only gets deeper from here. Because next, we uncover how America turned oil, the black gold of the modern age, into its secret currency. Let's jump to the 1970s, an era of flared jeans, Cold War tensions, and an American economy quietly gasping for air. After Bretton Woods, America had built its empire on confidence. The confidence that every dollar printed was backed by gold. But by the early 70s, that illusion was cracking. The Vietnam War was burning through cash. Social programs were piling debt. Foreign nations began asking a dangerous question. Can we actually exchange these dollars for gold? And when they did, America panicked. In 1971, President Richard Nixon went on live TV and dropped a bombshell. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporarily. That word still echoes through history. Because that temporary move ended the gold standard, forever. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by nothing. The world should have panicked, the dollar should have crashed, but instead, something genius, something ruthlessly strategic, happened behind closed doors, a secret meeting in the desert kingdom of Saudi Arabia. American officials sat with Saudi princes and made a deal that would rewrite global finance. The U.S. would protect the Saudis, militarily, politically, economically, and in return, every barrel of oil sold by OPEC would be priced only in dollars. That deal birthed the petrodollar. It meant that no matter where you lived, Germany, Japan, India, Pakistan, if your country needed oil, and every country did, you had to first get dollars. To get dollars, you had to trade with America. To trade with America, you had to accept their system. The world's demand for oil became the world's demand for US dollars. That's when the dollar got its second life. No longer a currency tied to gold, it became tied to energy, the very fuel of civilization. You don't own the oil, one US diplomat reportedly told a Saudi prince. You own the wells, but we own the system. And that system made sure America could print, and the world would still buy. Every tank, every plane, every power plant that ran on oil was indirectly feeding the dollar's dominance. While other empires conquered land, America conquered trade routes. But here's where the irony burns. When you make your currency the blood of global commerce, you can never stop pumping it. And over time, even the strongest systems start showing cracks. And tell me in the comments, do you think the petrodollar deal was brilliant strategy or economic blackmail? Because next, we'll uncover how America turned debt itself into a business model. There's an old saying on Wall Street, if you owe the bank $1,000, that's your problem. If you owe the bank $1 trillion, that's their problem. Well, America took that idea and built an empire out of it. You see, after the petrodollar deal of the 1970s, something strange happened. The US discovered a new kind of power, not through gold, not even through oil, but through debt. Now, for most of us, debt feels like a trap. You borrow, you struggle, you pay back more than you took. But for America, debt became a business model. Let me explain. Every time the US government spends more than it earns, which is almost every year, it borrows by issuing treasury bonds. These bonds are basically IOUs, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. And guess who buys them? Everyone. Banks, pension funds, foreign governments, from China to Japan to Saudi Arabia, all keep massive piles of these US bonds because they're safe. But here's the catch. When the whole world buys your debt, you can borrow forever. That's the illusion of infinite money. Imagine being able to print what everyone else works for, and they thank you for it. That's the US dollar system. In debt we trust could easily replace what's written on the note, because today, America's debt isn't a weakness. It's the backbone of global finance. When Washington borrows, the world invests. When the US prints, the world holds. It's not just numbers on a screen, it's control disguised as confidence. And you might ask, what happens when the world stops believing? That's the billion-dollar question economists whisper about but rarely say out loud. Because the moment faith breaks, the illusion shatters, soft, reflective pause. Remember Rome's coins, Byzantium's hyperinflation, China's paper collapse? All of them thought they'd found a cheat code too, a way to print without pain. Until history came collecting, and here's where it gets eerie. America's debt is now over $35 trillion. That's more than the value of everything it produces in a year. Twice. But the printing continues, because stopping means crashing. So the machine keeps running, powered by confidence, reputation, and hope. If you've made it this far, You're part of the rare few who actually think about how money really works. So do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who still thinks debt is just a government problem, and tell me below, do you think this system can last another 50 years? Or are we living on borrowed time? Because next, we'll uncover the truth behind how the US dollar became a silent empire, not through war, but through global trade and control. Empires used to rule with armies. Now, they rule with paper. Not the kind you write on, but the kind you believe in. After World War II, America didn't just rebuild the world, it reorganized it. Factories in Europe ran on US loans. Japan rebuilt on American aid. Even the World Bank and IMF, those global institutions, were born under Washington's thumb. And at the center of it all, the US dollar. The genius wasn't in how it looked, but in how it worked. While older empires drained wealth by force, America did it through trade and currency. They built what economists later called the empire of paper. You don't need colonies, one US advisor once said. You just need markets. And that's exactly what the dollar created. Markets tied to the American system. When a country like Brazil sells soybeans, or India imports oil, or Germany exports cars, somewhere in that transaction, the dollar appears. It's the middleman of global commerce, and that middleman takes a cut, because every time dollars move, banks earn. Every time nations save in dollars, America's debt gets funded. And every time someone trusts the dollar, Washington gets a little stronger. It's not a conspiracy. It's clever economics. But power built on trust is fragile. If the world ever decides to stop using that paper, the empire starts to shrink, without a single war fought. And that's what's quietly happening right now. In the last decade, countries like China, Russia, and even Saudi Arabia have started signing trade deals without the dollar. They're calling it de-dollarization, a fancy word that really means one thing: the world is preparing for life after the dollar. Why should we trade in their money? One Chinese official reportedly said, "It's time we trade in ours." Now imagine if that mindset spreads. If the oil you buy, the tech you sell, or the debt you hold no longer needs US currency, what happens to America's power then? Beat, slow, reflective, the same system that made the dollar unstoppable could one day make it obsolete. That's the paradox of the empire of paper. It only lasts as long as people believe in the paper. If you're still watching, you're clearly the kind of person who thinks deeper than headlines. And that's exactly the kind of audience this channel is built for. So if you're learning something new, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the world can ever break free from the dollar's grip? Or is it already too late? Because next, we'll talk about something darker. The truth that connects inflation, inequality, and the quiet transfer of wealth that happens every single day without you even noticing. Every empire had its thief. For Rome, it was corruption. For Byzantium, it was greed. For us, it's inflation. It doesn't march in with guns or chains. It creeps in silently, into your wallet, your savings, your dreams. And before you even realize it, what you earned yesterday buys less today. That's inflation. But here's the truth few people ever hear. It's not an accident. It's designed. You see, in the modern economic world, inflation isn't a side effect. It's a policy. Governments want a little bit of it, because it quietly reduces their debt while making you feel like you're still getting paid. Let me show you how it really works. When the US government prints more money, whether it's to fund wars, rescue banks, or stimulate the economy, that new money doesn't fall equally from the sky. It enters the system at the top. Banks, corporations, Wall Street investors, they get the fresh dollars first. They spend it while prices are still low. By the time that money trickles down to the average worker, prices have already gone up. So while the rich buy assets that grow in value, the middle class buys groceries that get more expensive. It's not just inequality, it's engineered inequality. We're all paying a tax, said one economist. It's just that it's invisible. And that's the cruel beauty of inflation. It feels like the market's fault. But it's really the system's design. Look, a cup of coffee that cost $2,000 and $2,000 now costs $5. A home that your parents bought for $50,000 now costs $400,000. But did your salary grow 8 times too? Of course not. That's the silent tax at work, taking your time, your savings, and your peace of mind. And here's what most people don't realize. Inflation doesn't just make things expensive. It changes how humans behave. When your money keeps losing value, you stop saving. You start chasing More work, more hustle, more debt, just to stay in the same place. That's not freedom. That's financial survival, soft emotional beat. And maybe that's the point. Because a population always chasing money never has time to question who controls it. So what do you think inflation is a mistake? Or a tool of control? Because next, we pull back the curtain on one of the most hidden powers behind the US dollar. The one institution that prints wealth, moves markets, and answers to almost no one. Every kingdom has a throne, and behind that throne, someone who truly rules. For America, that power doesn't sit in the White House. It sits inside a gray building in Washington, D.C., quiet, unelected, and untouchable. The Federal Reserve. Now, if you ask the average person what the Fed is, they'll say, it's the government's bank. But here's the thing, it's not. The Federal Reserve is independent, meaning it's a private system run by bankers influencing every part of your financial life without your vote. It decides how much money exists, how expensive your loans are, how strong your job market feels, all with a few keystrokes. And here's the scary part. When the Fed speaks, the world listens. We control the money supply, said one former Fed chairman, and through that, we control economic destiny. Let's rewind for a second. The year was 1913, Christmas Eve. While most Americans were home celebrating, Congress quietly passed the Federal Reserve Act. That night, a handful of men gave the power to print America's money to a central bank not fully controlled by the government. A century later, that decision still shapes everything you buy, own, and owe. When the economy crashes, the Fed steps in and prints. When markets rise too fast, it steps in and raises rates. It's the invisible hand that pushes, pulls, and balances, but always on its own terms. You see, the Federal Reserve doesn't create money from thin air. It creates it from debt. Every new dollar it prints comes with an IOU attached. And who owes that debt? We do, the people. The taxpayers, that's the trick. Every printed dollar is born as someone's liability. So the more the Fed stimulates, the more debt the world carries. It's like a magician, pulling endless rabbits from a hat, except every rabbit comes with a bill you'll have to pay someday. Now, to be clear, the Fed isn't evil. It's a system created to prevent chaos, to stabilize economies. But over time, that stability became control. When the Fed sneezes, global markets catch a cold. When it cuts rates, billions move overnight. When it prints, inflation follows like a shadow, and yet no one elects them. No one can fire them. They answer only to themselves. The real power behind the dollar isn't the paper, it's the policy. So let me ask you this. Do you think money should be controlled by a few hands, or should the people have a say in how their future is printed? Every empire believes it's invincible, right until the world stops believing in its currency. Rome thought its silver denarius would last forever, until it was melted down, mixed with cheap metals, and lost the trust of its people. Byzantium thought its gold solidus would outlive centuries, until corruption and overprinting destroyed its value. Even mighty China printed so much paper money during the Yuan dynasty that inflation erased entire fortunes overnight, and now it's the dollar's turn under the microscope. For nearly 80 years, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency, the blood running through the global economy. Every barrel of oil, every ounce of gold, every major international trade, all priced in dollars. That dominance gave America extraordinary power to sanction nations, to print without immediate collapse, to live beyond its means. But here's the quiet truth no one likes to say out loud. The world is slowly preparing for a life after the dollar. From Russia and China trading in their own currencies, to Saudi Arabia discussing non-dollar oil deals, to BRICS nations building their own alternative systems, the signs are all there. Every empire's money begins to lose its shine the same way. First, the world questions it. Then they stop depending on it. Finally, they move on from it, and when that happens, power shifts. Quietly, but permanently. Now, does that mean the dollar is dying tomorrow? No, not yet. But cracks are forming. The same cracks that history has shown us time and time again. Arrogance, overprinting, and debt disguised as growth. You see, the story of money isn't about numbers. It's about trust. And when trust breaks, the entire illusion shatters. So maybe the real question isn't, will the dollar fall? Maybe it's, are we repeating the same pattern every empire once thought it could escape? If you've stayed till now, you're not just a viewer, you're a thinker. Because understanding money isn't about greed, it's about survival. And history rewards only those who learn before it repeats. We've seen hidden truths, how power was printed, controlled, manipulated, and worshipped. But maybe the greatest truth of all is that no empire collapses overnight. It dies slowly, while its people keep believing everything is fine. So stay curious, ask questions, build knowledge before you build wealth. Because in the end, the strongest currency you can ever hold is awareness. If you found this journey eye-opening, drop a comment below which truth shocked you the most. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because our next series dives even deeper into the rise and fall of global empires and the economics that shaped their fate. Until then, remember, every empire prints, but only a few survive their own ink.